Hello everyone, welcome back to the Lorcana channel. I am joined by Zan Syed. He is an amazing Lorcana player, and today we're going to be showcasing Amethyst Steel, which is a color combination that we did not include in our recent tier list ranking because it's definitely unusual. It's not a list that you see a lot of people running at the moment. So on screen right now, you're going to see Zan's list that he brought to a 1K, which was a Star City Games event, I believe, and he did win the event. So Zan, introduce yourself. Feel free to talk about the deck list and your history as both a Lorcana player and Magic the Gathering player.
Hey guys, I'm Zan. I played professional Magic for 5 years. I was player of the year in 2019, and when the pandemic hit, I had to stop playing Magic. And then Lorcana came about, and I'm back into card games. The reason why I played Amethyst Steel was because the event on Saturday for the SCG Con, I played Yellow Steel, and I kept my only losses were to the 60 card mirror. I needed to shake things up, so a couple of friends of mine and I went to a beer garden that was right next to the convention center, and started playing. And I wanted to build a deck that tackled this problem, like tackled this matchup specifically, my Pride Lands version of Amber Steel. And I felt like red purple wasn't cutting it, and I had played purple steel the set before, and I felt like I could build a lower to the ground version. And so we started playing, and we played 4 matches, and I took all 4 of them, and I was convinced. I was like, I'm not going to test any on Pixelborn. I'm just going to trust the 4 games that I played. And then I walked in the tournament, and the rest is history.
That's awesome to see. It's really interesting to hear that you're experimenting with Amethyst Steel in the previous set, because I know myself, Moyne, and Brendan from Podcana, we actually tried to make that color combination work also. But at the time, it also had that kind of high end, which was the Ursula, the Elsa, Yzma for kind of removal. So it wasn't as low to the ground as this deck is. And the biggest issue that we found with the last iteration of Amethyst Steel was that there was no real way to remove large threats, such as, I mean, the previous Ruby Amethyst decks in set 2, they were running Ursula as well. So as Amethyst Steel, you were kind of forced to use a card like Yzma as your only removal tool to kind of deal with these threats. But now, looking at this version of Amethyst Steel, it's much lower to the ground. And I think with some of the new steel inclusions, it makes the list super solid. I've been describing the list to a lot of my friends and players who I've played against with is basically Ruby Amethyst, but you take out all the Ruby cards, you just put in good steel cards. And of course, we're going to be jumping into the deck in a little bit to discuss the specifics, but the biggest thing that I've loved about the deck before we dive deep into it has honestly been the fact that we're utilizing a lot of our 4-cost cards, such as the Merlin Rabbit and the Merlin Goat, to sing a terrific removal tool within the set, which is Along Came Zeus. And Zeus tackles with all of the high power locations, right? It tackles all of the pesky evasives, such as Minnie Mouse, which is a huge issue against the Ruby Amethyst matchup. But for me, I have to say that that's been the highlight. Having that removal tool, having something as simple as a rabbit sing Zeus for free has been amazing. And Smee has also been an absolutely outstanding card. All right, so taking a look at the deck from a high level, we're gonna talk through each of the cards and the reasoning why they're there. Most of these will be pretty self-explanatory, especially because the entire Madam Mim tempo package is in here, which is pretty much, it's really funny. Like, you look at lists like this and most people say, oh, it's a mono Amethyst list, right? Because it just runs all of the Madam Mim and Merlin cards. But yeah, starting off, we have the Captain Hook, obviously there as a fantastic 1-drop. You're going to combo that with the Mr. Smee, but just being able to have a card that has Challenger +2, it's very similar to the Rafiki. And I mean, the reason why you play this over Rafiki is obviously because we have Mr. Smee within the deck. It combos really well with Pinocchio. So, you know, if you have the Captain Hook on your board from turn 1, turn 2, you can use it to clean up a Ursula if you face off against the Emerald Singer Ursula. So that's super good. The 1-cost Robin Hood in here to combo with the Shift Robin Hood on turn 3. Super powerful play. Madam Mim Snake. I do want to touch on this card, Zan. So in your original list, you had 3 in here. And I know you mentioned it was an incredibly hard decision to cut this card. And I think ultimately you decided to opt for a Rafiki, right? The uninkable. Oh, Baboom. Yeah. But you did also have a Rafiki Rush in the deck, right?
And a Rafiki, yep.
Yep. Do you want to actually talk about the reasoning for, I guess we can talk about those 2 inclusions, specifically the Baboom and the Rafiki.
Yeah. So basically, I'm playing 8 1-drops and I felt like it wasn't consistent enough. I also felt like my main target for this deck is yellow steel, right? And you don't want to bounce as often. And Baba Boom dealt with the more problematic 1-drops, right? Like the thing that as a steel deck you don't want to let happen is specifically shift Robin Hood on 3, right? If that happens, that's gonna take a lot of resources to deal with. If you notice, you don't really have like the cleanest answer. The way you got to set it up is probably with Merlin. We like the cards that we're missing from this deck are like Maui, right? We don't have Maui to just cleanly take it out, or Madame Medusa. And so being able to deal 2 damage is really clean. The other thing about Rafiki, the 3-mana Rafiki with Rush is it's a play pattern thing. Everybody believes if there's no 1-drop or 2-drop, then there's no Rush character that's coming out on turn 3,
Sure.
which is usually Madame Mim Fox. And that is a complete game changer. Plus the way I like to think about it, it's the 5th Madame Mim, but you want that same element the other what do you call it, the red purple deck has with Maui's, but the way Madame Mim Fox plus the other card work is it's also like the 4th Merlin crab, but in kind of a different form. A major play pattern that yellow steel has is playing queen on 2 and then eliminating all of your threats. So it's a really clean way for you to be able to get rid of that, and they didn't ever expect it at all on turn 3.
Yeah, makes perfect sense, honestly. Next card, of course, Pinocchio. Insanely powerful card this meta, honestly. I saw a lot of red purple decks running it in set 2, but it's really caught on now in pretty much every Amethyst build at the moment. This deck is running 3 in particular, which I think is definitely necessary. There've been 1 or 2 times when sometimes, you see 2 or 3 Pinocchios at once and it can break your hand a little bit, but that is extremely rare in my testing of the deck. But it's super powerful, and it does exactly what you mentioned as well. It's like another way to kill off those early threats, such as if your opponent is gonna shift Robin Hood, right? If you get the Mim Fox out, then you can do the Pinocchio. Extremely powerful with Snake and with Fox to do the whole bouncing thing. Like one of the most powerful things that actually happened to me when I was at one of the major events, the 10K in Poland, was I was on blue steel. I was doing my ramp. I ramped into Gaston. My opponent had 5 ink. They just did the Pinocchio was already on the board, so they just did the Mim Fox, bounced the Pinocchio, and my singer's dead, right? So that combo is just extremely powerful. The potential that Pinocchio has, and I think a lot of players are recognizing it the more they play against it. Like I've seen people use one of my opponents actually had to Zeus my Pinocchio, which I'm happy. I'll take that trade, honestly, but recognizing the power of this card is crucial in your matchups for sure. How's your experience been with this card? And I personally think that 3 is the correct number, because a lot of people are kind of on the 2 train.
Well, I think it's major like it's major thing is that players are not adapting to it. Oftentimes, like I'll see like green steel players play an Ursula, the 2/3 Ursula, after when you just picked up the Pinocchio with your Madame Mim. So they're not like adapting to it. So one of the things I like to recognize is there are certain cards that cause players to behave in a certain way. And I wanted to rewind real quick to Captain Hook. It's one of those cards. Even if the trade is favorable for them and they need to get the lore to finish the game, they will stop luring at all, because they cannot imagine that their 3-drop with 3 defense is going to die to their Captain Hook. And so I value those type of cards even more. Robin Hood is another one of those cards. They can't fathom losing their card to it, and they kind of like stop luring, and that gives you a chance. And I often look for cards like that, because there's luck in Lorcana, but there's way more skill, and recognizing those play patterns, I think, is key to taking your game to the next level.
Next card we're going to touch on is Mr. Smee. Incredibly powerful card. My standout card in the deck so far, honestly. When you combine it with Captain Hook, like it's really interesting when you want to combine it with Captain Hook, because I've had instances where I've brought Smee out on 2, I've already had a Captain Hook on 1, and I've pretty much just done like Snake on 3, bounce the Hook, replay the Hook, and quest, because every time you quest and you don't take that damage, it's absolutely huge. It's honestly insane. But then Mr. Smee as a card, it's really interesting, because even at times when I feel like I ink it, I feel it's one of the cards in my deck that I hate inking because it's so powerful, right?
Hmm.
You have the ability to kind of switch on that gas and kind of start becoming the aggressor and questing for two more and more. So yeah,
Yeah.
this card has 100% been the standout for me.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if you think about the format in two ways, there's the Be Prepared decks, and then there's the Whole New World decks, right? If you think about it like that, Mr. Smee is like the best thing to do after both of those.
Yep.
And yeah, it's just like this free card that can deal with all the problematic threats like Ariel, but at the same time it'll make your clock infinitely faster, which I think red purple lacks in having, and isn't able to take advantage of goat like this deck can, because of the curve is much scarier.
Yeah. It's like a better snake in every way because you don't sacrifice a card, right? It's actually an advantage to have that one drop there with you as well. And when you compare a card like Mr. Smee to red purple, like it's a bit of a weird comparison, but I'd nearly say it's kind of like a faster Minnie Mouse. Minnie Mouse does something amazing in her own right, which is that evasion, but it's nearly like dropping a Minnie Mouse on turn 2 in some senses, right? Especially if
Oh
your opponent
yeah.
can't deal with it. It's crazy.
I've seen purple red opponents trade their mini maps
Oh,
just because they're losing the race.
oh man, yeah. There's something else as well that I'm sure Brandon's going to touch on when he does his Ruby Amethyst tips and tricks after he brought it to the set championships. But a lot of
Yeah.
players have been singing with their Minnie Mouse, and I think in some matchups it's probably correct. But I think in most matchups right now in the meta, you're like I've lost to red purple because they've gone Minnie Mouse on 3, Minnie Mouse on 4, and they've just quested and quested. But like that's the most powerful thing it can do. And when you compare cards that quest for 1 and quest for 2, I don't think people realize that it's literally double. It's double the amount of lore you're gaining, and that is absolutely huge.
It's hard to evaluate, especially as a newer player. It's hard to evaluate. So it's gonna take some people time to figure that out. And also, I think that making like full on rules of like you should never sing with friends on the other side and stuff. There's always way more context needed.
100%.
Like, so I'm always careful of making the blanket rules, because I start using the blanket rules against my opponents in in the future. So
yeah, next one's Madame M. Fox. Quite an obvious card, just like super powerful. Maleficent draws you a card, really good. Also a card that you don't hate inking, right? Like I think it is important to talk about cards in the deck that you don't care about inking as much as other cards, right? Because that's a decision in Lorcana that's super critical. And a lot of people ask, oh, like I played this deck, but I'm losing. Am I inking wrong? What is the main mistake I'm doing? So Maleficent's one of those cards, but it's also super good if you just need to keep your engine going. Merlin Crab. This card, as Brendan would say, this card is insane. This is Brendan's favorite card within Ruby Amethyst. So within this deck, it's super good. Like my opponent yesterday, I faced Ruby Amethyst, and I could literally just sense the play line that they were on the play. I put down my Merlin Crab on turn 3. They played their Queen's Castle on turn 4. I had the Fox in hand, so I bounced it, killed the castle. Like when you can kind of recognize these play patterns that your opponent is going to do. I think a lot of people don't play Crab on 3 enough. I think that's something that's really important. Playing Crab on 3 is not bad at all. You play it on 3, suddenly you can sing friends if that's what you want to do. You can bounce it to get challenger. Just because you're not taking advantage of the ETB when it comes into play immediately is not a bad thing, because you can bounce it and because you can use it for other things as well.
I completely agree. You are literally representing dealing with a Queen's Castle if you have the Fox in hand by playing the Merlin on 3.
Next one's Benja. Critical card within the meta at the moment, especially against red blue. This deck has the potential to bounce Benja, which is absolutely insane. I think kind of the counter to Benja is kind of just like Tamatoa, because even if you kill a dime, yes, they can get it back, but then they do have to pay for it again. But this card is one of the cards as well. I want to mention that in some matchups, it's just instant ink, right? You can keep it in your hand because, oh, this is a card I know I'm going to ink because my opponent's deck just doesn't run any items. But then the advantage is, even if you want to play it, it's a card, it's a 3-cost 2/3 that quests for 2. So even when it comes down, especially when you kill an item, it's another card that represents a lot of tempo and a lot of aggression for sure. So I've loved having 3 in the deck. Honestly, it's been super good.
Yeah, phenomenal card.
Goat, quite an obvious inclusion here. Absolutely amazing. Combos really well with all the bounce stuff to really turn on the gas and get you there to 20 lore even faster. But especially another great singer for Along Came Zeus. Like, I found myself thinking, oh, maybe I'll play a Queen's Castle to try and get the advantage here. But then if you have a Zeus in hand, it's like really good to try and get that 4-drop down if you can, because then you get to remove a target for free essentially. But the card that Zeus pairs with the best, in my opinion, of course, is the Merlin Rabbit. Like getting your 2/3 to just sing a song for free, super super good. And on the play as well, oh my god. On the play, when you do the Merlin Rabbit into the Zeus, it's insane. The tempo advantage you get is wild.
It's a key component for sure. Like it's so broken.
Mm-hmm. And the shift Robin Hood here, like you mentioned, it's the reason why a lot of people are running Baboom to try and kill the smaller Robin Hood. Definitely a card within the Ruby Amethyst matchup. If you play it kind of in the later game, it does get dealt with by Madame Medusa quite easily. And it's also worth pointing out, I think, for a lot of newer players, like the best way to deal with Robin Hood if you're on the opponent's end is to try to remove it with cards like Medusa or removal spells like Zeus or like Baboom, because when you kill it like that, the player with the Robin Hood doesn't actually get the card draw. I've seen a lot of people do that, but it also means in this deck, when you shift with Robin Hood, even if you want to, like on turn 3, if you shift Robin Hood, they don't have anything you can attack in with. Even Singing Your Friends isn't that bad because you get more cards. They are forced to deal with a big threat. They kill it, you get another card. So that's the biggest thing I've learned playing this deck is sometimes I've shifted Robin Hood on 3 and still felt like, I don't really know what I want to do. Should I quest? They can kill it. But if you quest for 2 and then you literally force your opponent to deal with this, you get another card out of it. So don't be afraid to, if you do get your shift on 3, don't just kind of sit on the Robin Hood, because that's something I have done a little bit at the start when playing this deck, and it's something that I've learned that a lot of the time you should just be utilizing it if you want to sing a song, if you want to do Zeus, or even if you want to quest. It's correct most of the time, I would say, especially when you shift it, because it's so powerful.
Yeah, shifting on 3, I mean, it totally depends on their board state.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that, like, let's say I'm playing against red purple, I put a high priority in killing their defeating their 1 or 2 drop, and I would or 3 drop using, and then along came Zeus. I think that sets them back so much because of their bounce package. So even if you're not hitting the most optimal target, it's such a massive tempo play. And I would rather do that than actually sing Friends on the other side, unless my hand is completely empty. And then right after when I do that massive tempo play, they're not going to be able to deal with Robin Hood until their turn 5.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have some level of guaranteed lore. And so in that spot, what I'm thinking is either I need to put a 2-power character out, or I need to keep the Baba Boom in my hand, because the play pattern is going to be they're going to play Maui, take out my Robin Hood, I'm going to draw a card, and if I have the Baba Boom, then I can take out that Maui for free. And that's also a good moment to try to play a Queen's Castle or etc.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the only real way that Ruby Amethyst has to deal with even the small Robin Hood is the Pinocchio, right? They've no... I mean, to be honest with you, my opponent who I lost to in the finals of my set championship, Keen, great friend of mine, he was running Ruby Amethyst, and he's opted to keep the Teeth and Ambitions package in. And I'm not going to lie, it does work against this deck, right? It stops it stops that shift from happening. So lots of variations of the deck running around. So those are cards to keep in mind for sure. Friends, an obvious inclusion here. We've got lots of great 3 drops to sing with. Also a card that sometimes you can just keep as ink. And another card that you don't mind inking too much. We've talked about my inclusion of the Strength of Raging Fire. So my reasoning to put this card in instead of the Baboom is because my biggest struggle against Ruby Amethyst was dealing with the 3-cost Minnie Mouse Surfer. And I felt like most of the time in this deck, you can have 2 to 3 characters relatively easily. And then if you can sing it, it always feels bad pretty much to play this card by itself. If you sing it, it's incredible. But after kind of discussing this with Zan, I do think the Baboom makes a lot of sense against a lot of the other matchups. And oftentimes, if you do use your Zeus to kill the Minnie Mouse, it seems fine. There's not too many targets in that matchup that you want to keep the Zeus for. Maybe a Tremaine, maybe a Medusa, but like the Minnie Mouse comes out so early in Quest for so much. If you get rid of it, you're very, very happy.
I will say in Ruby Amethyst, it kind of, like I thought about playing it, and it was in some of the lists that I had tested. The reason why I ended up not playing it, like if you think about the Ruby Amethyst list, it forces you to overextend into the Be Prepared. So even if you do deal with the mini, it's usually at a not good cost. So if you wanted like a direct answer, I would almost rather play Smash.
Yeah, that's a fair inclusion for for sure, definitely. Zeus, we know how powerful this card is. We talked about comboing it with Merlin Rabbit and Okay, so the last two cards, yeah, Sorcerer Spellbook and Queen's Castle. So I opted for 1 Spellbook and 4 Queen's Castle. I know in your version you have 2 Spellbook and 3 Queen's Castle. Do you want to talk to me about that a little bit?
Yeah, it was just a meta call. I knew that my meta was going to have a lot of Ruby Amethyst. And if you think about Ruby Amethyst, they're all about dealing with locations. If anything, they're the reasons why more locations aren't being played right now. And so, hence the 2 spellbooks.
Let's jump into matchups. So we'll try and keep this a little bit brief, but Zan, I'll let you start off with this one. So we'll discuss Ruby Amethyst. This is probably the matchup we've been talking about the most, right? Because it's a deck that I think most people will bring to set championships because it's just like super consistent across the board. But how do you think it performs? Like, do you think it's closer to 50-50? Do you think you're favored like 60-40? There's been a few times where I've honestly felt favored, but then there's been a few times where I felt it's been closer as well.
I think that if it was two like pro level players, it is a 50-50. Like, let's say we're playing at the top of the hardcore ladder, it's 50-50. But I would say that like if you're going into a set championship or even the challenge, I think that majority of the time you're slightly favored. And the reason why is it's a repetition thing. Ruby Amethyst players have played against a lot of Ruby Amethyst players, but they don't exactly understand the play patterns against this deck. And so that will always be a inherent advantage.
Yeah, that's a huge thing. I faced so many Ruby Amethysts on my first day of the set championship, and they're like, I don't feel prepared for this matchup because I have no idea how to face this deck. Next one we're going to talk about is Ruby Sapphire. We're extremely favored in this matchup due to the 3 benches. Also, the ability to kind of switch on the gas with cards like Mr. Smee, the Goats. Even like it's super interesting. I feel like a lot of the red blues, at least in my local meta, have switched off the fish hook. So even to deal with the Queen's Castle, the Maui is actually not enough anymore. They have to. If they have a Hiram on board, I've had my opponent force, like, instead of questing with their Hiram, they actually have to hit with the Hiram to clear the location as well. So, yeah, overall, I felt extremely favored against Ruby Sapphire. I never felt like I was at a disadvantage. Only times if your hand bricks really badly, but that's just card games at the end of the day. Any other specifics you want to talk about that matchup? I think the ability to bounce Benja, like we mentioned, is actually huge in that matchup.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I would watch Ceviche's stream to figure out what is going to be the more mainstream list, and then if he's playing fish hooks, then that's what most people are probably going to go with.
Next one is Sapphire Steel, and this is a list that I feel is one of the matchups that I felt the most unfavored in. Similar to how well the deck performs against Ruby Amethyst. The advantage you have in this deck, though, is you do have Benja, so it's a nice answer to the Fishbone Quill. The most obvious card in that matchup that's really difficult to deal with is Cogsworth, because you can't target it with Zeus. But most of the other cards, besides Robin Hood, right, the Beast, the Tinkerbell, you can target with Zeus pretty well. You can kill their dime with Benja. But overall, the matchup is tricky. But I do want to talk about the whole new world in that matchup, Zan, because that's something you kind of designed this deck to be good against. So when your opponent does the whole new world against you, it doesn't feel too bad playing this list, right?
Yeah, no, it's actually in your benefit, right? If you think about what your game plan is going to be, it's going to be to deal with their Fishbone Quill, and if you deal with their Fishbone Quill, then you're in a really great shape. I would say the games that are probably not gonna go well for you are the games where they're playing, where their Hiram engine is going off, right? But if they're casting a whole new world and you're dealing with their Fishbone Quills, then like I think that you win all of those games, just because your natural curve is so much less than there, and you have so much incidental lore, right? With your goats, with your castles, with your spell books, all of those things are going to add up. The thing that you always need to be doing is you know what their list is, right? Majority of people are within 55 to 55 cards of the exact same list nowadays, and so you need to be prioritizing putting out a Robin Hood, right? Because that forces them to have the Let It Go or like 2-for-1 themselves in order to deal with it. And you have to be but yeah, I think that post whole new world, if they don't have a fishbone quill in play, then you'll just be able to empty your hand quicker, and they're just getting you to more goats and stuff, and you'll win.
Yeah, yeah. An important thing to note in that matchup as well is like they do have an answer to your location in the form of Rise the Titans, but like something that's really interesting to take note of is I think most lists are running 2. So if you see your opponent like ink 1 at the very start, then you should really be valuing like, okay, my castle's actually going to be like super good against them, because that deck doesn't have too many cards with high attack, right? So it's going to be quite difficult for them to actually deal with the location. So that's something to keep in mind. And next matchup is Amber Steel. So I'll let you have the floor for this because this is the reason why you built the list.
Oh yeah, I mean, so something important to note is it's not always correct to play. Let's say you're on the draw and your opponent plays a Cinderella on turn 1, right? It's not always correct to play your 1-drop into the Cinderella. So something often I will try to do is overload that Cinderella. So a major game plan should be to try to put out a Robin Hood to try and beat that, right? So you can go turn 2 double Robin Hood, and you're trying to shift that Robin Hood the next turn, and that puts them in a dilemma. The other thing that you can do is try to play a Smee on turn 2, and that makes their life extremely difficult as well.
Yeah.
And so so don't always give them like you're not forced to play out your 1-drop on 1 and let them play the game the way that they want to.
I think something that you mentioned there that I've actually done against Amber Steel as well is like the double 1-drop on turn 2 is super effective against them, because they really struggle to deal with both of them, especially if it is the double Robin Hood, then you can shift it. But the more important thing, yeah, that's actually really interesting, is like if you play into their turn 1 Cindy, you're just giving them a free target in order for them to use the Let the Storm Rage On, in order for them to actually get the card draw. So it's definitely interesting. I will say that in the 2 games I had, I did play into it on turn 1, and I was just like, don't have it. And sometimes that's fair as well. You have to play it and hope that they don't have the answer. Something super powerful that deck does as well is they do Cindy on turn 1, Smee on turn 2, and then Aerial on turn 3. And if they find something like a Strength, it's super difficult, because even if you establish the Smee or a Snake or something like that, like it's quite hard to deal with that. So
and that's when the Rafiki comes in.
That's where exactly because they're not going to expect, they're going to be like, oh, you've got no way to remove my Aerial, or to remove the Cinderella even, and yeah, that's a super effective tool. Another reason why you should be running Baboom in the matchup as well.
So if you think about Blue Steel, they started playing fire cannons, and their reasoning is exactly the same. We can't play fire cannons because it's not inkable, and we don't have the luxury of Fishbone Quill.
Next one is Emerald Amethyst. So this is quite similar to Emerald Steel, which we'll get to in a minute, but this deck has access to a lot more draw potential. So in the Emerald Steel matchup, they want to kind of do a lot of the discard stuff, right? So if they play the Singer Ursula, then they can use it to sing Sudden Shield and get rid of your hand. But they oftentimes don't have access to as much cards as the Emerald Amethyst, unless they do their Let the Storm Rage On with their Singer Ursula. But with this deck, they can get a lot of cards pretty fast. The toughest things I found in this matchup is that you really need to keep your removal Zeus for key targets such as Dawn Carnage, which is a card that not all of the Emerald Amethyst lists have run, but I did see a lot of it in my local meta, and I think it's actually a pretty good meta call if you are an Emerald Amethyst enjoyer, because it dodges Medusa pretty well. That 4 health is like obviously above the 3 health slot. Only real thing that kills it is Zeus, and Genie is incredibly powerful in that deck as well. Although luckily for us, most of the time, if they Genie our stuff, it's kind of an advantage for us, because a lot of our targets care about being bounced back to the hand. But yeah, how have you found this matchup in general? Have you played it much?
Yeah, I think it's extremely favorable, but it's one of those repetition things. One key piece of advice I've been giving is don't keep any songs in your opening hand. And if you do draw songs, try to ink them before turn 2 because you shouldn't let their Ursula connect for free.
Yep, makes perfect sense. Yeah, and then onto the Emerald Steel, like we said. Emerald Steel is one of those decks that I've been talking about it with a lot of people. I think it's going to perform quite well in the 2-game format, because if that deck just has the nuts, it can pop off like crazy. But the best way to beat up upon it is again utilizing the Boom against that particular deck, because it beats up upon the Cursed Merfolk, beats up upon the Flynn Rider, and then you can also use your Pinocchio. You really have to try and save that Pinocchio for the key turn when you want to kill off their Singer Ursula. So that's like the best advice I can give against that. And yeah, also the same thing with the Emerald Amethyst is just ink your songs instead of basically letting your opponent have the luxury of discarding it. Any other advice you want to talk about against this deck in particular?
If this deck continues to get popular, it becomes like 20% of the meta or something, I would consider putting Grab Your Swords back into the deck.
Yeah, a lot of people did ask me about like they were surprised of how little high end removal or just high end cards there were in general. Like when people heard I was playing this list, they're like, "Oh yeah, so you're just running like Think Grab Your Swords?" I'm like, no, the deck doesn't need it. This current iteration doesn't need it, but I do agree. Yeah, if that deck continues to rise in popularity, we will need to add more removal
I think
tools.
Prince John is the main culprit for that. I mean, like we can't touch ward characters currently.
Yeah, and then the last one I want to touch upon is a really fun match I had yesterday actually. So it was against Jafar, so Amethyst Steel. So the matchup felt really close, but I kind of felt a little bit favored because their hand can oftentimes be quite clunky because they play a lot of the kind of high cost Bloodborns, but they can definitely pop off if they kind of get their blue fairy and their kind of card draw engine going. But again, because it's a bit of a weird one, because it's a whole new world deck, you feel okay against it, but when that whole new world generates like 7 to 8 lore, it's kind of difficult to get past. But you kind of have to hope that they don't get the combo off. The biggest culprit for me was not being able to deal with the blue fairy. But again, I was running strength. I wasn't running Baboom, so that's one way you can deal with it. And you also want to try and keep the Zeus for a lot of the Floodborn targets, but then also for the Jafar if it does come down, because that's your only real answer to it. But ultimately, to beat this matchup, I think you have to just outpace them. To be honest.
Yeah, I think that you can outpace them pretty easily. But yeah, I mean, just don't focus your energy on dealing with characters that aren't named Jafar.
Yeah,
and I think that your clock is just 1,000 times faster.
100%. Yeah, that's most of the matchups. I think one little mention I'm gonna say is I'm gonna say Mufasa, because I actually did face one Mufasa deck. That deck's kind of hard to beat if you don't have the right cards. And I will say the card that saved me twice when I played against Mufasa was Sorcerer's Spellbook. It literally it was so clutch. Yeah, my opponent could get to 19 lore, and I got Spellbook early on. I just kept tapping it and tapping it and tapping it, because the biggest thing about Mufasa is once they get a Chernobog out against you, oh my god, it's incredibly difficult to deal with. Like once that Chernobog comes out, it's like, okay, am I in a position to win the game in like the next 2 turns? So
yeah.
And they also play Minnie Mouse as well, right? The Ruby Amber Mufasa deck. So
yeah.
it is actually quite difficult, because you want to be saving your Zeus for that card in particular. They also play like Pongos and stuff like that. So even trying to feel like, oh, do I even want to try and deal with this Jafar? Probably not, because anything, or deal with the Mufasa, because anything that comes off of it could be detrimental. Yeah, I could pull something small and I could remove it, but then if it pulls an evasive, I can't kill it. If it pulls a Maleficent, I can't kill it. So it's an interesting matchup for sure. And I was surprised. I saw a few Mufasa decks actually winning set championships, which is always cool for me to see. I think the deck is an enjoyable one. It's actually the first deck I tested within set 3, and I had a lot of fun with it. But yeah, the matchup's definitely interesting. So that's all the matchups. Zan, if you want to touch on anything else, feel free to. But if not, we can jump into any changes that you would make as the meta kind of continues to evolve. And if you took this to your set championships, obviously the biggest thing we've been telling everybody on the podcast is there's no one deck you bring to a set championship. It's a meta call. You have to do your best to
Yeah.
try and judge what the meta is going to be. If there's loads of amber steels there, bringing red blue is probably going to be good. Alternatively, if there's going to be a lot of red blue there, I wouldn't be bringing an amber steel deck. But the reason, again, I'm going to ultimately say why I brought this deck, and when I found it from your Twitter, was I felt
Mhm.
like I didn't have that many bad matchups at all. I felt like I didn't really want to play any Sapphire Steel, but besides that, I felt pretty comfortable nearly playing every single game, and that's the best thing that I want bringing a deck to the set championships.
Yeah, it's just the cleanest, and like even if against whatever your bad matchup is, they can't, like if you have the perfect curve and you just like maximize your lore every turn, you can just win any against anybody.
Yeah.
So that's what I like about it.
Mhm.
What would I change? So on Sunday, I played in the finals. I was playing Steel Song with flutes against my Steel Songs
With
playing
Pride
Pride
Lands.
Land.
Mm-hmm.
That was the finals. It took freaking forever, but since there were three Steel Song decks in the top four of the last, like our biggest set championship, I think that people will either try to deal with it or try to try to beat it. And so this lines up in a good spot against that, because people's main answer is usually blue red, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so um I still don't think I would play the fourth Madam Mim, the Madam Mim Snake. The reason why is because you don't always want to bounce your one drops, because Robin Hood wants to get shifted a decent amount of times, and so it's mainly with like the Captain Hook hands where you're looking to bounce it. And so, and then if you ever have a Smee, it's almost always playing Smee over the Madam Mim. And so I felt like we said Bubba Boom enough times that I think I still play Bubba Boom.
Yep.
But again, I think it is possible that I consider at least one Grab Your Sword, because I think like the first Grab Your Sword might be worth more than the second Bubba Boom, right? Like just like having one in your deck and having the possibility to rip it and completely change the game. I think that that goes with a lot of those matchups, and with like Little John on the rise, I think that's one of the decks that people are going to be gravitating towards, especially if you looked at the meta today on Pixelborn. It also top aided a lot of our tournaments as well, so I could see playing a Grab Your Sword over the Rafiki and playing two Bubba Booms.
Yeah. Once again, thank you so much for joining me with this deck tech. It was a lot of fun. Feel free to
Thank you
shout
so much
yourself
for having
out and talk about what you're doing. And also tell us, how many stitches have you won? I know the answer, but tell everybody.
me. I've won two stitches so far. Well, first one was on Friday, top four with blue steel, and then I did not like that deck. And then Saturday I lost in top eight. And then Sunday I won with yellow steel songs, and I got the mat this time. So
Awesome.
so two stitches so far.
I'm sure that feels good. That's your bread and butter deck, right? Like that's the deck you probably put the most work into, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, no, I definitely have, but the purple, I had to just put purple red back in its place,
Yeah.
so they were
Hell
getting
yeah.
out of hand.
Hell yeah. All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed the deck tech. Thanks for sticking with us.